On a flight where status was everything, one snap judgment unraveled a woman's world and revealed a lesson she'd never forget. The first-class cabin of Flight 709, a sleek transatlantic jet soaring from Paris to New York, hummed with the quiet elegance of wealth. Plush leather seats stretched wide, each a private oasis of comfort. Crystal glasses clinked softly as flight attendants poured vintage champagne. The air smelled of polished wood and subtle perfume, a world reserved for those who could afford the sky's finest luxuries. Business tycoons tapped on laptops, a B-list actress scrolled through her phone behind oversized sunglasses, and a few Wall Street types murmured about stock portfolios. Into this polished scene stepped Cristiano Ronaldo, the soccer legend, his presence understated yet magnetic. He wore a black hoodie, faded jeans, and sleek sunglasses perched low on his nose. No entourage, no fanfare, just a backpack slung over one shoulder and a faint smile curling his lips. His chiseled jaw and confident stride betrayed his fame, but the casual attire masked it. He moved with the ease of someone who owned every room but didn't need to prove it. Heads turned, some recognizing him, others unsure, their eyes lingering on the man who seemed both out of place and utterly at home. Hey, before we start, smash that subscribe button, comment "Wow" if this story moves you, and don't skip. The final moment will blow your mind. Ronaldo slid into seat 2A, the window seat, his movements smooth, almost cat-like. He tossed his backpack under the seat and leaned back, scrolling through his phone, earbuds dangling loosely. Next to him, in 2B, sat Margaret Vanderbilt, a woman who radiated old money arrogance. Her tailored cream blazer screamed Fifth Avenue, her diamond earrings glinted under the cabin's soft lights, and her manicured hands clutched a sleek Hermes purse. She sat ramrod straight, her lips pursed, her eyes scanning Ronaldo like a scanner assessing a barcode, her brow furrowed, disapproval etched into every line of her face. This man, with his hoodie and scuffed sneakers, didn't belong. Not here, not in her world. She adjusted her silk scarf, her movements sharp, and shot a glance at the flight attendant, a young woman named Emily, whose name tag gleamed under her navy blazer. Margaret's voice cut through the cabin's hum, loud enough to turn heads. "Excuse me," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "Is this gentleman really supposed to be in first class?" The word gentleman sounded like an insult, her eyes raking over Ronaldo's outfit as if it were a personal offense. Emily, her smile professional but strained, nodded politely. "Yes, ma'am. The passenger is in his assigned seat. Everything's in order." Margaret's lips tightened into a thin line. She wasn't satisfied. She leaned closer to Emily, her voice a stage whisper meant to be heard. "There must be a mistake. This is first class. Perhaps his seat is in economy." The word economy landed like a slap, and a few passengers glanced over curious. Ronaldo didn't flinch. He kept scrolling, his thumb moving lazily across his phone screen, one earbud in, the other dangling. His face stayed calm, almost amused, as if he'd heard this script before. Margaret pressed on, her voice rising, sharp as a blade. "I paid a fortune for this seat. I expect a certain standard, and frankly this," she gestured at Ronaldo, her hand slicing the air, "is unacceptable. It's not safe. It's not right." The cabin grew quieter, the tension thickening like fog. Eyes darted between Margaret and Ronaldo, waiting for a reaction. Across the aisle, a teenage boy named Jake, all lanky limbs and messy brown hair, nudged his mother, Sarah. "Mom, that's Cristiano Ronaldo," he whispered, his eyes wide with awe. Sarah, a tired-looking woman in a simple sweater, glanced over, her face lighting up with recognition. "No way," she murmured, pulling out her phone to snap a discreet photo. Jake clutched his soccer jersey, a faded Ronaldo number 7, his hands trembling with excitement. 2 rows back, Ethan, a tech CEO in a crisp blazer, raised an eyebrow, his phone already recording the scene. He leaned toward his assistant, whispering, "This is gonna go viral." Margaret, oblivious to the growing attention, kept her tirade going. "I'm not comfortable," she told Emily, her voice now a theatrical hiss. "This man doesn't belong here. Look at him. He looks like he just walked off a street corner." The words stung the air, raw and ugly. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably, their murmurs rippling through the cabin. Jake's face fell, his hero under attack. Sarah put a hand on his shoulder, her eyes narrowing at Margaret. Ronaldo finally looked up, his sunglasses slipping slightly to reveal sharp, dark eyes. He tilted his head, studying Margaret with a calm that felt almost dangerous. His smile didn't waver, but there was a glint in his gaze, like a lion sizing up a challenger. He pulled out one earbud, letting it dangle, and leaned back, his posture relaxed but deliberate. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and smooth with a faint Portuguese accent. "If you're not happy, I can ask the crew to find you another seat. No trouble." His tone was polite, almost gentle, but it carried a weight that made Margaret blink. She hadn't expected him to speak, let alone with such composure. Her cheeks flushed, but her pride held firm. "I'm not moving," she snapped, her chin lifting higher. "This is my seat. I just want you to understand, this isn't a place for people like you." The phrase hung heavy, laced with venom. Jake gasped softly, clutching his jersey tighter. Sarah shook her head, whispering, "She has no idea who he is." The cabin felt like a pressure cooker, every eye on the unfolding drama. Emily, caught in the middle, approached again, her voice firm but calm. "Ma'am, the passenger has a valid first-class ticket. We ask that you respect all guests on board." Margaret huffed, crossing her arms, her diamond bracelet glinting like a warning. "This is outrageous," she muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I paid for exclusivity, not to sit next to someone who looks like they don't belong." Ronaldo's smile faded slightly, but he didn't bite. He slipped his sunglasses off, revealing eyes that sparkled with quiet strength. He plugged his earbud back in, leaned against the window, and closed his eyes, as if the world's noise couldn't touch him. The cabin buzzed with whispers. Ethan's phone kept rolling, capturing every second. Jake, unable to stay quiet, leaned toward his mom. "She's gonna regret this," he whispered, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and excitement. The plane began its ascent, the engines roaring as the cabin lights dimmed. Margaret sat rigid, her hands clenched around her purse, her face a mask of indignation. She stole glances at Ronaldo, expecting him to react, to argue, to prove her right. But he didn't. He was a statue of calm, his breathing steady, his face serene. The silence from him was louder than her words, and it gnawed at her. Across the aisle, Sarah whispered to Jake, "He's handling this like a champ." Jake nodded, his eyes glued to Ronaldo, as if waiting for a miracle. Ethan, still recording, muttered to his assistant, "This is gold. She's digging her own grave." The tension simmered, the cabin a stage for a showdown no one had expected. Margaret's confidence began to crack, her eyes darting around, sensing the shift in the room. She wasn't the star of this scene anymore. Then, a new figure emerged. A flight attendant, a young man named Lucas, approached Ronaldo's seat, his face beaming with nervous excitement. In his hands was a small, polished wooden box, tied with a gold ribbon. "Mr. Ronaldo," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "this is from the captain. He's a huge fan. He said it's an honor to have you on board, and he wanted you to have this." Lucas handed over the box, his hands shaking. Ronaldo opened his eyes, his smile returning, warm and genuine. "Wow, man, that's awesome. Tell the captain thanks," he said, his voice soft but rich with gratitude. He took the box, his fingers brushing the ribbon, and set it on his lap. The cabin fell silent, every eye on the exchange. Margaret's face paled, her lips parting as if she'd been slapped. She leaned forward, straining to hear, her arrogance crumbling like sand. Jake whispered to Sarah, "Told you. She's done." Ethan's camera zoomed in, capturing the moment Margaret realized she'd misjudged the man in the hoodie. The box sat unopened, a quiet symbol of something bigger. Margaret's eyes flicked between it and Ronaldo, her mind racing. Who was this man? Why was the captain sending him gifts? The whispers around her grew louder, passengers exchanging knowing looks. Sarah leaned toward Jake, her voice low. "She's about to eat her words." Jake grinned, his faith in his hero unshaken. Ethan, still filming, murmured, "This is gonna hit 1 million views." The plane leveled off, cruising through the clouds, but the real turbulence was in Margaret's heart. She sat back, her hands trembling, her world of privilege suddenly feeling small. Ronaldo, unaware of the storm he'd stirred, leaned against the window, the box in his lap, his face calm as ever. The cabin lights glowed softly, casting shadows that seemed to dance with the weight of what was to come. The first-class cabin of Flight 709 hummed with a new energy, the air thick with unspoken tension and quiet awe. The plane soared through the clouds, its engines a steady drone, but the real turbulence churned in the hearts of those in seats 2A and 2B. Cristiano Ronaldo sat by the window, the small wooden box from the captain resting in his lap, its gold ribbon glinting under the cabin's soft lights. His face was calm, his eyes half closed, as if the storm of Margaret Vanderbilt's words had never touched him. His black hoodie and faded jeans seemed to mock her earlier disdain, a silent rebuke to her assumptions. Margaret, meanwhile, sat rigid in her cream blazer, her diamond earrings catching the light like tiny accusations. Her hands clutched her Hermes purse, knuckles white, her face a mask of conflicting emotions, shock, shame, and a stubborn pride that refused to yield. The captain's gesture had cracked her carefully curated world, and the whispers around her felt like needles. She stole glances at Ronaldo, her mind racing to piece together who he was. The name Ronaldo echoed in her head, a faint memory from a news headline she'd skimmed years ago. But her world of boardrooms and galas had no room for soccer stars. Across the aisle, Jake, the teenage fan, could barely contain himself. His lanky frame vibrated with excitement, his Ronaldo jersey wrinkled from his nervous grip. "Mom, he's the greatest," he whispered to Sarah, his voice low but urgent. Sarah, her sweater slightly frayed at the cuffs, nodded, her eyes warm with pride for her son's hero. "He's handling this like a pro," she murmured, glancing at Margaret with a mix of pity and disapproval. 2 rows back, Ethan, the tech CEO, leaned forward, his phone still recording, his sharp eyes missing nothing. "This is better than reality TV," he whispered to his assistant Mia, who nodded, her fingers tapping notes for a potential social media post. The cabin buzzed with a subtle current, passengers exchanging looks, some shaking their heads at Margaret's outburst, others craning to see the man who'd drawn the captain's attention. An elderly woman, Clara, sat quietly near the back, her silver hair neatly pinned, her eyes sharp and kind. She watched the scene with a knowing smile, her hands folded over a worn leather journal, as if she'd seen this play out before. Ronaldo, sensing the shift, opened the wooden box with a gentle tug on the ribbon. Inside was a miniature soccer ball, signed by the captain with a note. "To CR7 you inspired my youth. Fly high." Ronaldo's lips curved into a soft smile, his fingers tracing the ball's stitching. He turned it over, his eyes distant, as if revisiting a memory of a muddy field in Madeira where he'd first kicked a ball. The cabin seemed to hold its breath, the gesture a quiet coronation of the man Margaret had dismissed. Jake couldn't stay still any longer. He unbuckled his seatbelt, ignoring Sarah's warning look, and approached Ronaldo, his phone clutched like a lifeline. "Mr. Ronaldo, I'm Jake," he stammered, his voice cracking. "I'm your biggest fan. I play striker because of you." Ronaldo looked up, his sunglasses now tucked into his hoodie, his eyes warm and direct. "Hey Jake, that's awesome," he said, his voice low and genuine. "You scoring goals out there?" Jake blushed, nodding furiously. "Trying to. Got a hat trick last month." Ronaldo grinned, leaning forward. "That's my guy. Keep working, yeah? It's all about heart." He reached into his backpack, pulled out a black wristband with CR7 stitched in gold, and handed it to Jake. "For the next hat trick." Jake's face lit up, his hands trembling as he took the wristband. Sarah, watching from her seat, pressed a hand to her chest, her eyes glistening. "Thank you," she mouthed to Ronaldo, who nodded back, his smile easy but profound. Margaret watched, her throat tight, the scene unfolding like a mirror to her own missteps. Jake's joy, Ronaldo's kindness, it was everything her world of wealth and status lacked. She shifted in her seat, her purse feeling heavier, her pride a weight she couldn't ignore. The cabin's attention shifted to Ronaldo, passengers now openly staring, some pulling out phones to snap photos. Ethan, still filming, leaned toward Mia. "This is going to blow up on X," he said, his voice low with excitement. "She's toast." Mia nodded, her eyes flicking to Margaret, who seemed to shrink under the collective gaze. Clara, the elderly woman, caught Margaret's eye and offered a small, encouraging nod, as if urging her to see the moment for what it was, a chance to grow. Margaret's mind churned. She thought of her upbringing in a Manhattan penthouse, where her parents drilled into her that wealth was a shield, appearance a currency. "Never mix with those beneath you," her mother had said, her voice cold as marble. Margaret had lived by that rule, curating her life to exclude anyone who didn't fit her mold. Now, faced with Ronaldo's quiet dignity, that mold felt like a cage. She wanted to speak, to undo her words, but her tongue felt heavy, her pride a stubborn anchor. Ronaldo, oblivious to her turmoil, leaned back, the soccer ball still in his hands. He glanced at Jake, who was back in his seat, showing Sarah the wristband like it was a holy relic. "Mom, he's so cool," Jake whispered, loud enough for Margaret to hear. The words stung, a reminder of her snap judgment. She'd seen a hoodie, not a hero, a man, not a legend. Ethan, sensing the moment, stood and approached Ronaldo, his blazer crisp, his smile calculated but warm. "Cristiano, I'm Ethan, big fan," he said, extending a hand. "I run a tech startup in Silicon Valley. Your foundation's work in kids' education, it's inspiring. Ever thought about partnering with tech for impact?" Ronaldo shook his hand, his grip firm. "Man, I'm all about helping kids," he said, his voice earnest. "Send me your ideas. Let's make something happen." Ethan's eyes lit up, sensing a deal. He glanced at Margaret as he returned to his seat, his look one of quiet triumph, as if he'd just won a round she didn't know she was playing. Margaret's face burned, the cabin's attention now a spotlight on her mistake. She wanted to disappear, to rewind the flight, to unsay her words, but time didn't work that way, and neither did truth. Clara, the elderly passenger, watched Margaret closely. She opened her journal, scribbled something, then tore out the page. As she passed by Margaret's seat to use the restroom, she slipped the note into Margaret's purse, her movements swift and discreet. Margaret didn't notice, too lost in her thoughts. The note, written in elegant cursive, read, "Pride builds walls. Humility builds bridges. Choose wisely before you land." Clara returned to her seat, her face serene, as if she'd planted a seed and trusted it to grow. The cabin settled into a quieter rhythm, the initial shock of Ronaldo's identity fading into a hum of admiration. Passengers resumed their routines, sipping drinks, watching movies, but the air felt different, charged with the weight of a lesson unfolding. Ronaldo, sensing the calm, turned to Margaret, his voice low and kind. "Ma'am, if I'm making you uncomfortable, I can switch seats. No big deal." His offer was genuine, his eyes free of judgment. Margaret froze, her heart pounding. She'd expected anger, maybe sarcasm, but not this. Kindness in the face of her cruelty. It disarmed her, cracked her defenses. "No," she said, her voice softer than before, almost fragile. "I'm fine. Stay." Ronaldo nodded, his smile faint but warm, and turned back to the window, the clouds rolling by like a silent sermon. Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for her purse, her fingers brushing the note Clara had left. She didn't open it, not yet, but its presence felt like a whisper, urging her to face herself. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, the plane cruising smoothly, but inside Margaret, a storm was brewing, a storm of shame, regret, and the faint stirrings of change. Jake, still buzzing with excitement, whispered to Sarah, "He's even cooler in person." Sarah nodded, her eyes on Margaret, who seemed to shrink in her seat. "She's learning something," Sarah said softly, her voice tinged with hope. Ethan, reviewing his footage, murmured to Mia, "This is more than viral. It's a moment." Clara, watching from her seat, closed her journal, her smile quiet but knowing. The plane sailed on, the clouds outside a canvas of possibility. Margaret sat in silence, her world unraveling, the man in the hoodie no longer a stranger but a mirror, one she wasn't ready to face, but couldn't look away from. The first-class cabin of Flight 709 felt softer now, the earlier tension dissolving into a quiet hum of reflection. The plane glided through the night sky, its windows framing a sea of stars, the world below a distant memory. Cristiano Ronaldo sat in seat 2A, his black hoodie slightly rumpled, the miniature soccer ball from the captain resting on his lap like a talisman. His face was serene, his eyes tracing the clouds outside, a faint smile playing on his lips. He'd said little since the captain's gift, his silence a canvas for the cabin's shifting emotions. Margaret Vanderbilt, in 2B, sat with her hands folded, her cream blazer no longer a shield, but a weight. Her diamond earrings caught the dim cabin lights, but their sparkle felt hollow. She'd been quiet for a while, her earlier arrogance replaced by a restless unease. The note from Clara, the elderly passenger, burned in her purse, unread but heavy, like a stone in her conscience. The cabin was a stage, and Margaret was no longer the star. She was the student, grappling with a lesson she hadn't signed up for. Across the aisle, Jake, the teenage fan, clutched his CR7 wristband, his eyes bright with hero worship. He whispered to his mother, Sarah, his voice a mix of awe and excitement. "Mom, he's so chill. Did you see how he handled her?" Sarah nodded, her sweater sleeves rolled up, her face warm with pride for her son's idol. "He's teaching her something without even trying," she murmured, glancing at Margaret, whose rigid posture had softened, her shoulders slumping slightly. 2 rows back, Ethan, the tech CEO, scrolled through his phone, reviewing the footage he'd captured. "This is gold," he whispered to his assistant Mia, who nodded, her eyes flicking to Margaret with a mix of curiosity and pity. Clara, the silver-haired woman near the back, sat quietly, her journal closed, her eyes sharp and kind as she watched the scene unfold. She'd planted her note, a seed of wisdom, and now she waited, her face calm but expectant, like a gardener trusting the soil. Margaret's fingers brushed her purse, hesitating over the note. She pulled it out, her hands trembling, and unfolded the elegant cursive. "Pride builds walls. Humility builds bridges. Choose wisely before you land." The words hit like a quiet thunderclap, stripping away her defenses. She glanced at Ronaldo, his profile lit by the window's glow, and felt a pang of shame so sharp it stole her breath. She'd judged him by his hoodie, his jeans, his casual ease, assuming he was less. Now, she saw the truth. A man whose greatness wasn't in his fame, but in his heart. Her mind flashed to her estranged sister, Claire, whose last words to her had been, "You think you're better than everyone, but you're just alone." Margaret had dismissed it, her pride a fortress. Now, that fortress was crumbling and the loneliness stung. She wanted to speak, to undo her words, but fear held her back. What if he rejected her apology? What if she looked weak? Ronaldo, sensing her gaze, turned slightly, his eyes meeting hers. There was no anger there, only a quiet understanding that made her feel seen. Too seen. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked, his voice low, almost gentle, his Portuguese accent softening the words. Margaret swallowed, her throat tight. I owe you an apology," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, shaking with the weight of her pride. "I was wrong. I judged you by how you looked, and I was rude. I'm sorry." The words felt foreign, like a language she'd never spoken. Ronaldo tilted his head, his smile faint but warm. "No worries," he said simply, his eyes holding hers. "Happens all the time. People see the outside, not the story." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "When I was a kid, I got kicked out of a tryout because my shoes were taped together. They thought I was nothing. I proved them wrong, not with words but with work. You don't owe me anything, but maybe next time, give someone a chance to show their story." Margaret's eyes stung, tears threatening to spill. His words weren't a lecture, but they cut deeper than any scolding could. She nodded, unable to speak, her hands twisting the note in her lap. Jake, watching from across the aisle, nudged Sarah. "She's actually sorry," he whispered, his voice tinged with surprise. Sarah smiled softly. "Sometimes it takes a big heart to crack a hard shell," she said, her eyes on Margaret, who seemed smaller now, human. Ethan, still scrolling, murmured to Mia, "This is getting real. She's breaking." Mia nodded, her fingers pausing on her tablet. "It's not just her. This whole cabin's learning something." Clara, in the back, watched with a quiet smile, her hands folded, her journal a silent witness to the transformation unfolding. Ronaldo leaned back, his fingers brushing the soccer ball. "You know what's funny?" he said, his voice light, breaking the heaviness. "This hoodie? Worst purchase ever. My sister picked it out, said it makes me look normal. I told her normal's overrated." He chuckled, the sound warm, like a crackling fire. Margaret let out a shaky laugh, her first real one of the flight. "It's not that bad," she said, her voice hesitant but genuine. Ronaldo raised an eyebrow, mock offended. "Not that bad? Ouch. You're tough, ma'am." The lightness in his tone disarmed her, and for a moment the cabin felt less like a battlefield and more like a shared space, human and raw. Jake, catching the exchange, grinned at Sarah. "He's so smooth," he whispered. Sarah shushed him, but her eyes sparkled with amusement. Margaret took a deep breath, her hands steadying. "Can I ask you something?" she said, her voice stronger now. Ronaldo nodded, his eyes curious. "How do you stay so calm? I was awful to you and you didn't even flinch." Ronaldo thought for a moment, his fingers tapping the soccer ball. "I learned early," he said, his voice steady. "People judge what they don't understand. My dad used to say, 'Don't fight fire with fire, fight it with water.' I choose water. Keeps me cool." He smiled, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Plus, I'm too pretty to get mad." Margaret laughed again, louder this time, the sound surprising her. The cabin seemed to exhale, the tension melting further. Ethan, watching, leaned toward Mia. "He's a master at this," he said, his voice low with admiration, turning hate into a moment. Clara, from her seat, opened her journal and wrote a single line. "Sometimes the greatest lessons come from the quietest voices." She closed it, her eyes on Margaret, who was now looking at Ronaldo with something like respect. Margaret's mind drifted to Claire again, their last fight a blur of harsh words over money, status, things that seemed so small now. "I have a sister," she said suddenly, her voice soft but urgent. "We haven't talked in years. I think I owe her an apology too." Ronaldo nodded, his face serious but kind. "That's a start," he said. "Family's messy, but it's worth it. Call her when we land. You'll feel lighter." Margaret nodded, her eyes glistening, a weight lifting she hadn't known she carried. Jake, unable to stay quiet, stood again, his phone in hand. "Mr. Ronaldo, can I get a picture?" he asked, his voice eager. Ronaldo grinned. "Only if your mom's in it too," he said, waving Sarah over. Sarah blushed, smoothing her sweater, and joined them. Ronaldo slung an arm around Jake, pulling Sarah in close, and they posed for a selfie, Jake's grin wide enough to light the cabin. Margaret watched, her heart aching with a strange mix of envy and hope. She wanted that ease, that connection. Ethan, sensing the moment, stood and approached. "Cristiano, I've got an idea," he said, his voice smooth. "My company's launching a kids' sports app. You in for a collab? Could help kids like Jake." Ronaldo's eyes lit up. "Send me the pitch," he said. "If it's about kids, I'm listening." Ethan nodded, slipping back to his seat, already typing an email. Margaret, emboldened by the warmth around her, reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook. She scribbled a line, her hand steady. "Greatness speaks softly." It was Ronaldo's essence, distilled into words. She looked at him, her voice barely audible. "You didn't just teach me about you," she said. "You taught me about me." Ronaldo tilted his head, his smile soft. "That's the thing about mirrors," he said. "They show you what you need to see, not what you want." Margaret nodded, her eyes wet but clear. Clara, watching from afar, smiled, her seed taking root. The cabin lights brightened as the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their descent into New York. The plane tilted gently, the city's lights winking below like a promise. As passengers stirred, preparing for landing, Margaret felt a shift inside her. She wasn't the woman who'd boarded in Paris, all sharp edges and judgment. She was softer now, raw, human. She turned to Ronaldo, her voice steady. "Can I take that picture now?" she asked, a shy smile breaking through. Ronaldo laughed, his eyes crinkling. "Only if you ditch the serious face," he teased. "You're in New York now. Gotta smile like you mean it." Margaret laughed, a real, unguarded sound, and pulled out her phone. Jake, ever eager, offered to take the shot. "Get in close," he said, his voice bossy but kind. Ronaldo and Margaret leaned in, Jake and Sarah joining, a makeshift family born in the sky. The flash went off, capturing a moment of unlikely connection. The plane touched down, the wheels kissing the tarmac with a gentle thud. Passengers clapped, a tired ritual, but for Margaret, it felt like applause for something deeper. She stood, her purse lighter, her heart fuller. Ronaldo grabbed his backpack, slinging it over his shoulder, his movements easy, unhurried. "Gotta get home," he said to Margaret, his smile warm. "Mom's probably cooking something better than this plain food." Margaret smiled, a real one this time. "I'm going to call my sister," she said, her voice firm. "Good for you," Ronaldo said, his eyes sincere. "Tell her you're ready to listen." Margaret nodded, her throat tight, and watched as Ronaldo moved toward the exit, already swarmed by fans. Clara, gathering her things, passed by Margaret and touched her arm lightly. "You chose the bridge," she said, her voice soft but clear. Margaret blinked, clutching the note, and nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. Clara smiled and disappeared into the crowd. Ethan, packing up, caught Margaret's eye. "You okay?" he asked, his tone kinder than before. Margaret nodded, her voice steady. "Better than okay." She stepped off the plane, her phone in hand, dialing Claire's number as the New York air hit her face, warm and alive. Ronaldo ahead signed autographs, his laughter ringing out, a beacon of light in a sea of faces. For Margaret, this wasn't just a landing. It was a beginning, a chance to rebuild, to be human, to choose humility over pride. The city waited, and so did her heart. The story of Cristiano Ronaldo's encounter with Margaret Vanderbilt on Flight 709 is more than a tale of a celebrity humbling an arrogant stranger. It's a mirror held up to our own lives, reflecting the snap judgments we make and the walls we build with pride. As I read through the vivid scenes, the plush first-class cabin, Margaret's sharp words, Ronaldo's unshakable calm, and the quiet transformations that unfolded, I felt a mix of emotions. Frustration at Margaret's initial cruelty, admiration for Ronaldo's grace, and a deep resonance with the universal struggle to see beyond appearances. The story, set against the backdrop of a transatlantic flight, feels quintessentially American in its themes of redemption, second chances, and the power of human connection to break down barriers. It's a narrative that doesn't just entertain, but challenges us to reflect on our own biases and choices, offering lessons that can shape how we move through the world. At its core, the story stirs frustration because Margaret's behavior is painfully familiar. Her quick dismissal of Ronaldo based on his hoodie and jeans echoes moments we've all witnessed, or, if we're honest, participated in. In American culture, where first impressions often carry weight, it's easy to judge someone by their clothes, their accent, or their demeanor. Margaret's arrogance, rooted in her privileged upbringing, represents a mindset that values status over substance. I felt a pang of irritation reading her sharp words, her assumption that Ronaldo didn't belong in first class. It reminded me of times I've seen people sidelined because they didn't look the part. A coworker overlooked for a promotion, a stranger ignored in a crowd. Her actions highlight a societal flaw. We often equate worth with wealth or polish, forgetting that true value lies deeper. This realization hit me hard, making me question how often I've let appearances cloud my judgment. Yet Ronaldo's response, calm, kind, and unflinchingly himself, shifted my frustration to awe. His ability to absorb Margaret's insults without retaliating is a masterclass in emotional strength. In a culture that often celebrates loud comebacks and social media clapbacks, Ronaldo's silence feels radical. He didn't need to prove his worth. His presence did that. His story about being kicked out of a tryout for his taped-up shoes struck a chord, reminding me of the American dream's promise. Hard work and heart can overcome any barrier. Ronaldo's humility, despite his global fame, is a beacon of what it means to stay grounded. I found myself admiring his choice to fight fire with water, as he put it, a philosophy that feels both timeless and urgently needed in a world quick to argue and divide. The supporting characters, Jake, Sarah, Ethan, and Clara, added layers to this emotional journey. Jake's wide-eyed admiration for Ronaldo reminded me of the purity of childhood heroes, a feeling many Americans can relate to, whether it's idolizing a sports star or a musician. Sarah's quiet support for her son mirrored the everyday sacrifices of parents, grounding the story in relatable warmth. Ethan, the tech CEO, brought a modern edge, his instinct to record the drama reflecting our culture's obsession with capturing moments for clout. But it was Clara, the elderly passenger, who resonated most with me. Her subtle wisdom, slipping a note into Margaret's purse, felt like the voice of experience we all need, a reminder that growth is possible at any age. Her note, "Pride builds walls, humility builds bridges," became the story's heartbeat, a mantra I kept turning over in my mind. Margaret's transformation was the story's emotional core, and it moved me deeply. Her shift from arrogance to vulnerability felt authentic, not forced. Her confession about her estranged sister Claire hit close to home. In American culture, where family ties can fray under the pressure of ambition or pride, her resolve to reconnect felt like a universal call to action. I thought of my own relationships, moments I've let pride or judgment create distance. Margaret's journey from isolation to openness showed me that change is possible, even in a single flight. Her tears, her laughter with Ronaldo, her decision to call her sister, these moments felt like a quiet victory, a reminder that redemption is within reach if we're brave enough to face our flaws. The lessons from this story are practical and profound, easily applied to daily life. First, it teaches us to pause before judging. In a fast-paced world, we're conditioned to make quick calls on co-workers, strangers, even friends. Ronaldo's story urges us to look deeper, to ask, what's their story, before assuming. This could mean giving a new colleague a chance to shine or listening to a neighbor we've dismissed. Second, it shows the power of responding with kindness. Ronaldo's choice to offer Margaret a seat swap, despite her cruelty, is a model for diffusing conflict. In our lives, this might look like staying calm in a heated meeting or offering grace to someone who's wronged us. Finally, the story underscores the courage to change. Margaret's apology, her vow to reconnect with Claire, these are acts of bravery we can emulate. Whether it's mending a family rift or admitting a mistake at work, the story reminds us that humility is a strength, not a weakness. Applying these lessons feels urgent in today's America, where division often overshadows connection. In workplaces, schools, or even online, we're quick to categorize people, rich, poor, successful, struggling, without seeing their humanity. Ronaldo's example challenges us to be the bigger person, to meet judgment with understanding. I've started practicing this in small ways, listening more at family dinners, asking questions instead of assuming, and catching myself when I'm tempted to judge based on looks. The story also inspires personal growth. Like Margaret, I've been reflecting on relationships I've neglected, planning to reach out with a call or a heartfelt text. These small steps, inspired by a single flight, feel like a ripple effect, turning a moment of clarity into lasting change. Ultimately, this story is a call to build bridges, not walls. It's about choosing empathy over ego, connection over judgment. Ronaldo didn't set out to teach Margaret a lesson, but his presence, his quiet, unshakable authenticity, changed her. That's the power we all have in our own way to influence others by being true to ourselves. As I reflect on this, I'm reminded that every interaction is a chance to learn, to grow, to be better. Whether it's a stranger on a plane or a friend across the table, we can choose to see their story, to offer kindness, and to let humility guide us. This story isn't just about Ronaldo or Margaret. It's about all of us, and the choices we make in the fleeting moments that define who we are. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button to show your love, share it with friends who need a dose of inspiration, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that make you think and feel. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in Ronaldo's shoes or Margaret's? Your thoughts matter, and we'd love to hear them. Let's keep the conversation going.